you all for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, Madhur Jaffrey, 91 years of age.
90. It's okay. 91 will do, but I'm actually just turned 90.
And more importantly, it's the 50th anniversary of her first book. And Madhur, you didn't necessarily, yes, a big round of applause for that. But Madhur, you didn't start off either as a writer or as a chef or an expert in food. You started off as an actor.
I don't know how I started out actually, because if you go back in my life, I think I started as a rebel. And the rebellion part came because we lived in a joint family with my grandfather at the head of the household, and then aunts and uncles and lots of kids in this big house. It was on the banks of the Jamna River, we call it the Yamuna, if you want to be more correct, river in Delhi. And then near the big house on both sides were two courtyards. And on the other side of each, one courtyard was a whole string of kitchen, dining room, etc. And on the other side was a whole string of rooms, as they call them, kamras. Because my grandfather was a barrister, and these were his law rooms where he worked. And of course, by the time I was of any age when I could read, he had become very old. So the room was always kept shut. It wasn't locked, the room that used to be his office. And in that room, there were a lot of books, mostly legal books, but there were also books of knowledge, which I loved to read. I read every one of them. But one day I discovered a book next to it with a red cover that was the family history. And I read through it. It was so exciting to know who my ancestors were, what caste I came from, how the caste came into being. It was a caste of scribes, so we were mostly writers and lawyers and historians, but people who wrote for a living. So there was ink in my veins since the time I was little. And so he went on through the centuries till it came to the Mughal period, and there we were ministers in the court and doing grand things. And then it came to the British period, and there we were working for the British, and we fought for the British. The Indians said, my family said, "Humne inka namak khaya hai." We have eaten their salt, so we will fight for them. And we fought for the British during that period. But as I was looking at the history, man after man after man after man, where were the women? Did nobody keep any record? Were the women chopped liver? What were they? So I needed to understand what role the women played in this whole cast of characters and this whole history that went way back, but nothing was recorded. And even in my household when I was growing up, the situation was that the boys were treated differently from the girls. There were lots of children in the house, boys and girls. It just happened that all the cousins of my age were all boys. I was the only girl in that group. So I played cricket with them, I went fishing with them, and I wore little shorts because that's what they wore. But I always felt, where am I in all this? Who am I? And I think that kind of rebellious feeling and a feeling of not my potential, where is it going to go, was very, very strong since the time I started. So if you want to know the kind of compulsions that drove me when I was a little child, it was this, that I wanted to do things, but what could women do? And nothing was okay unless the men allowed it. Your father had to say yes, and then your brother had to say yes, but my mother couldn't say anything. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything on my own. And I don't know if this happens in other countries, but it was certainly happening in India when I was growing up.
Madhur, one of the most poignant bits of the book, in the foreword you've written about how when you were a kid, you used to go and peep into the kitchen with just the sheer pull of the aromas frying of the mushrooms. But by and large, the aunts used to sort of shoo you away and used to go and play, and then used to come back because just the aroma was so strong. And you also talk about how first the men were served and then the women sat down, and you hoped that you'd get some of those delicious mushrooms at the end.
Here's the thing that now I do it too, but we're talking about different households. One was my grandfather's household, which had a long dining room, and one end was faced the river, and one end did not face the river. And there were table after table after table, and the children sat on the last table. So it started with rather nice chairs, where my grandfather and my grandmother sat, and all of the older people sat. And then soon it became benches, when it became time for the kids. So I didn't know what my grandparents were eating half the time. I didn't know my grandmother was a vegetarian, because I couldn't see what she was eating. And so I discovered much later that she had been a vegetarian all along. There were vegetarians up at the other end of the table that I didn't know. But food was just put in front of on different tables, and we all just took our food. But there was my Nana ka ghar, my
maternal grandparents.
My maternal grandparents' house, which was in the old city of Delhi, where houses are very close to each other. And there they sat and ate in the Mughal kind of way. In the Muslim way, where a sheet was spread on the floor, and the men ate first, and we would have these in the months of August and September. We would have these fabulous little kumbi mushrooms, and they were cooked in such a delicious way, but it was served to the men first. And the men kept eating, they would send for more. I said, would even the little sauce be left at the end? Would anything be left? And I used to pray, let them not eat everything. So sometimes they ate everything, and there was only the little bit of gravy left, but sometimes they didn't. And those mushrooms were triply delicious, partly because they'd been left by the men, and partly because they were so good, so utterly delicious. So I think I started learning how to enjoy my food since a very early time. And this is something that I say to people all the time, that when somebody is a good cook, you say they have a good hand. No, it's not the hand really. What is happening is that you have a good palate. And a good palate is recording, is tasting everything, first of all. Every little flavor, nothing goes by it. It tastes it and then sends it up to your little computer brain, and it's recording it. So it's recorded. So every time you taste it again, you say, oh, I know what that is. And so the result of this kind of thing, I call it taste memory, whatever you want to call it, is that when I go shopping now, I can go and say, oh, the beans look very good today. How am I going to make them? And I say, okay, I can try mustard seed and coconut and
hing.
And hing, okay? We can try that. But I'm tasting this. I say, maybe not today. Or maybe I can do a sort of tomato-y, onion kind of tomato with lots of Kashmiri chili powder. So how does that? So I taste that and I accept it or reject it. So I've already planned my dish by not actually eating anything, but by tasting it mentally. And I think I'm not the only person who does that. I think a lot of people who have a good palate and a good memory of what they've eaten do that. And it goes to their head and you recall it and then you try and recreate it. That is why I can go and eat something at a restaurant and say, they probably put this, this, and this in it. I may not be utterly correct, but I'm more or less correct, and I can recreate it very often. Sometimes I can't, but sometimes I can. And I think it's this thing which I call taste memory, that brings it all back and that makes a person a good cook with a good hand, as they say.
Madhur, you also talk about how important it is for color and presentation, and there's this lovely incident when I think Gillespie comes home for a meal and you made this beautiful fish, but you've spent hours trying to choose a beautiful platter on which to serve the fish. Of course, the fish turned out to be raw, but that's a different matter.
Yeah, that's a story. It was, in fact, my husband was a good friend of Dizzy Gillespie's. And he's a classical musician, but he loved to go hear jazz. It was one of his favorite forms of music. And Dizzy was a friend, and he said, "You must come home and my wife will cook." And he was so proud of his wife who would cook this great meal for Dizzy Gillespie. And I was nervous, but I was also said, "Okay, I can cook. And what will I cook for Dizzy that he would like?" And I said, "I'll bake a whole fish with an Indian kind of tomatoey sauce with mustard seeds and curry leaves and things like that. And I'm sure he'll enjoy that." So I made this, I bought a big bass, and I made it, and I put it in the oven, and it was in the oven, I think, for 20 minutes, and I brought it out, and brought it to the table, and everybody oohed and ahed, and then I cut into it.
The mic.
It stopped. It wouldn't cut. And it was raw. It was completely raw. So I was so embarrassed. I had to say, "Excuse me." It took another 45 minutes for this big fish to cook. But everybody waited, everybody was cheerful, and we ultimately had a fine meal, but it was a very embarrassing moment for me.
But Madhur, apart from being cook, actor, you also love to draw, and that's one of the things that is in the first book, which is celebrating its 50 years.
So, how shall I say this? There were several things that I was interested in since I was little. And I said, who is like me? A rebel who hasn't found a place in life. Who is like me? And I remember I read a lot, and I read Jane Austen. And Jane Austen, when I read it, do you remember the opening lines of Pride and Prejudice? If I can remember them now. "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man with a handsome fortune must be in want of a wife." They're sort of wonderful lines, and she could be so delicately and genteelly caustic, and she was so wonderful to read. So I started writing, and I started writing very early, and I was writing initially in English, but then I studied Hindi for some reason as well, and I was writing in Hindi as well. I was writing in English and Hindi, and I loved that aspect of my life. Then there was another person that was a similar inspiration for me. And I don't know if you know her, but you will of course know her. She was a painter who painted in the 30s. And she was half Indian and half Middle European. And her name, you must find her paintings, you must look her up, because she inspired me to such an extent that I began to paint and draw. And her name was Amrita Shergill. I don't know, you must look up her work. She's one of to me, the most inspirational painter, because she combined the very open aspects of Western painting at that time and the sort of curving lines of Indian art. So she combined the two, and she could do one or the other or mix them all up. And she had a kind of freedom that I really, really enjoyed, and that gave me courage and hope and whatever else was needed. So these were the two big influences in my life at that time. We won't talk about the acting influences right now because I can talk about them later. But they inspired me to be, in many ways, what I am. Rebellious, but appreciating the arts, appreciating painting, and appreciating good writing.
In fact, there's a new film that's going to be made on Amrita Shergill by Meera Nair, which will go on the floors shortly by October, November. It should be out in a year and a half or so. So you all will get to know a little bit more about this amazing painter who lived in different continents and had many lovers.
Yes.
Madhur, coming back to, you said that you didn't have a voice, your mother didn't have a voice, but there you were, very insistent on doing theatre. which wasn't necessarily something that genteel ladies of your did, especially who lived on the mall. How did you sort of break with the family tradition and go off to do all of this acting, and that too with Saeed?
My father, I remember in 1965 or 66, Shakespeare Wala, one of the films I did, was being shown to the Indian vice president. It was a big showing in a big house, crowded, and all kinds of celebrities were there. Marlon Brando was there, Satish Ray was there. It was lots of people, all the top people in India, and lots of invited guests. And I heard my father walking around the corridor saying to the vice president of India, acting is just her hobby. and, this is how it goes. This was my father. It's all right. I mean, she's just doing it, but that's not what she does. What does she do? He didn't have any faith in me or belief in me that I would do anything. It was just something I did, That was it.
Nothing really changed. I remember in the 70s when I was in theatre, early 80s, my father used to say, so how should I introduce you? What do you do? As a regular thing.
Yes.
And later when I met my wife, my father-in-law said to young man, what do you do? And I said, I do theatre. And he said, no, I mean, what's your day job?
I know.
So nothing's really changed.
Yeah, exactly.
But Madhur, you got a scholarship to RADA and you took off to England. And was that again something that was easy or practical?
It was so, you see, when I was ready to go, I think what year would it be, in the 50s?
In the 50s, yes.
Yeah, and I was ready to I was bursting at the seams. I knew I had to go somewhere and go to a place where I could be myself in some way. And I could have gone to the JJ School of Art. That was a choice for me, because I couldn't decide what I wanted to be, an artist or what. Or I could study the theatre, go and study the theatre. And for theatre, at that time, there was no school in India. So there was a government scholarship for different kinds of artists in different fields. So I applied for that, because there was no foreign currency. India didn't have foreign currency at that time, so we couldn't get dollars, we couldn't get pounds. So if you wanted to go abroad at that time, you had to apply to the government in some way so you could get foreign currency. So I applied to the Indian government for this grant to go abroad, and they gave me their scholarship, but it wasn't very much money. So I didn't know how I could pay for RADA with that amount of money. So I was doing a play. It was a one-actor Tennessee Williams play called Otter de Fay, and I was doing it for the theatre that I worked for. And it happened that the British consul came to see it, and he was very impressed. So he said, we'll give you a scholarship as well. So he gave me a scholarship. And then RADA gave me a scholarship. So in the end, I had so much money that I could go skiing in Europe with the money that I got for my scholarship. But that's how.
But despite all the money, you still had to have very cold cabbage in RADA, which you hated. Well, and you just dreamt of all of the spices back home.
Yes. You remember a lot. He knows my story, he can tell it. I don't even have to speak. So what happened was that, so then here I am at this very prestigious drama school, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London. And I'm loving all the acting, I'm doing very well in the school, and they had a habit of keeping back a third of the people in each class and throwing out a third of the people in every class. So only 1/3 kept moving ahead. And I was studying there and very happy studying there, but at every time for a meal we had to walk up 5 flights of steps and go to the canteen, and there would be this grey slice of roast beef and grey cabbage and grey potatoes, all watery and not very pleasant to eat. And I would sit at the table at Radha, dreaming of my mother's hing zire ke aloo, potatoes cooked with cumin and asafoetida, and the potatoes and cauliflower that I loved, and the meat that she made, it was always goat, cooked with whole spices. I would dream about these things. So I started writing air letters to my mother in India. My mother spoke no English, so I had to write in Hindi. And my mother was 8th pass, as they say. She hadn't gone beyond the 8th grade in her school because she was very white-skinned, and if you're white-skinned, you're considered beautiful in India. And she was pretty, and they all thought she'll make a good match anyway. She's so pretty. Why educate her? Why spend the money and time in educating her? So she only went to the 8th grade, and that was it. And then she was married off to my father. And so what was I saying?
We were talking about you writing letters back home, asking for the recipes.
So I wrote to my mother, and she wrote letters back in Hindi, but they were like 3-line recipes. You take a little bit of this meat, and you put these spices in the oil, and you cook them, and then you put the meat in, and then you put a little ginger, and then you cover and let it cook till it's done. 3 lines. But you see, this is where my taste memory came into play, because I could remember the taste, and I would cook it again and again and again. I had landlords where I lived in London in my digs who were very happy to taste the food I was cooking, and I would give it to them to eat, or we would eat together. And I eventually got to the correct taste of the recipe just by experimenting. So it was a fun time for me, just learning from my mother. And then after that, I started writing to everybody, this aunt, that aunt. Some were Bengali, my brother's wife was Bengali, so she was sending me the Bengali dishes. Somebody else was from Gujarat, and they were sending me, my sister was married to a Gujarati, so he was sending me the Gujarati dishes, and I was getting recipes from the family. So my first book is all the recipes that I got from my family. It's not a big book in the sense that I'm aiming at telling everyone what Indian food is, because I didn't know Indian food too well. I only knew the food of the family. So the first book I wrote, an invitation to cooking, Indian cooking, which came out 50 years ago and has been in print since then, all the time. And we are bringing out the 50th year edition in November. So that book is the book that holds all my initial recipes.
And how did that book come about? Because there was a floating sort of independent agent who came to you, and then he disappeared.
He knows everything. So that's how it happened, because all these recipes that I was cooking, I was then writing down roughly so that I would have them at hand. And I was approached by an independent editor who said, I would love to do a cookbook of yours, because Craig Claiborne, the food writer for the New York Times, had done a big piece on me when Shakespeare While the film came out, as an actress who cooks. So I think based on that...
with a very beautiful dish of biryani at the end, with her beautifully decked out in a silk sari with original zari, which is an iconic photograph even today.
So where was I? So
you were talking about how Claire sort of did this story on you.
Yes. So Craig Claiborne had done the story, and so I was approached by this editor, and I said, sure, I'll put a book together. And I started putting the book together. And when it was ready, I don't know what happened to him, but the book eventually went to a publisher that split into 2 publishers, and the book landed with one side, and then that side closed down, and I was suddenly left with a book and nowhere to sell it. So Ved Mehta, I don't know if you know him as a writer, he's a wonderful, he died recently, he was a wonderful writer who wrote for the New Yorker. And he was my good friend and advisor on a lot of matters. And I asked him, Wade, what shall I do? I have this kind of book here. You might call it a book, it's almost done. What shall I try and do with it? He said, let me call. And he called Andre Schifrin, who was another editor, and he was, I forget which press he was with.
Wasn't he with Knopf?
No, he wasn't with Knopf, he was with, I can't. You know, when you get old, names just fly out of you. Like this, you see, gone.
Yeah,
It's
it's
gone.
true.
It's just not there. But if it comes to me, I'll tell you. He was with another house, that is of the Random House family. Not Knopf, another house. Pantheon. Thank you. And he said, send it to Judith Jones. I'll send it to Judith Jones, who had done Julia Child's book. She later did Marcella Hazan's book. She did all the great cookbooks. And Judith read it and bought it overnight. Not for a lot of money, I have to say, but she bought it. So that's how that book got sold.
You were in London, you finished RADA, you were at a loose end, you're not sure what to do, and then what happened with Saeed? And how did you get to America?
Okay, so then I'd finished RADA. I had a boyfriend who, I'm Hindu, he was Muslim, and my father had not actually so much, I mean, all my father's best friends were Muslim, so that was not the problem. The problem was that he was an actor. What did he do? We don't know what he did. So he kept telling me, he looks very pale, he doesn't look healthy. Is that the reason why you don't want me to marry him? Anyway, my father never actually approved of that wedding. So Saeed had gone to America. I got a scholarship to England, he got one to America. And so he had gone to America, and so I decided to join him.
But he had already proposed to you once before and you sort of rejected him.
No, I never rejected him. My father rejected him.
That's convenient.
No, I was always willing, but it's my father. And then eventually we did get married in Washington. And started a life, had 3 children very quickly, divorced very quickly after that. And then my life turned to more acting. I met James Ivory and Ismail Merchant, introduced them to each other, got to know the two of them, and we began to dream of films that we would do together.
And those films, of course, have now become so legendary. They really
Yes.
became, in many ways, Ruth Jhabwala, yourself, Ismail Merchant,
And
James Ivory.
I want to tell you that I knew Ruth in India because she used to write for the radio. She used to write little radio plays. And I met her long ago when my kids were little, very little. And I remember her husband, Jab, used to call my 3 little girls mice, the 3 mice. And her 3 girls were just a little bit older. And so I met her a long time ago, and I've known her for a very, very long time. And when it came to casting, am I jumping? Can I jump around?
No, please jump around. But keep your mic, because all of this is being
Okay.
broadcast, yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. So when it came time to doing the film Shakespeare-Wala, we had started, Jim and my ex-husband and I used to sit on Jim's floor of his apartment and write the screenplay of a film that we wanted to do together, which was something like Shakespeare-Wala. It was going to be called something like that, where we would go back to India, Saeed and I would go back to India, form an acting company, and travel around doing plays. That was our dream, that's what we would do. And so Jim said, I'll make a film about that. So we would sit on the floor and write the screenplay for this film. And then, as it happened, Saeed and I divorced. Jim was very angry with Saeed. And he said, he can go. And he happened to go to India, where he met the Kendalls, who had a company called Shakespeareana, and they were British. but traveling through India, doing bits of Shakespeare plays or a whole play every now and then, but usually little bits because they didn't have a big cast with them.
So this was Jennifer Kendall, who later went on to marry Shashi Tharoor. So the Kendall family.
No, not
were-
Tharoor, Shashi.
Shashi
Kapoor. It's all right. We know everybody. They're all friends. Shashi Tharoor, Shashi Kapoor, we are all friends. So anyway, have I finished my story?
No. You were talking about touring. They were going to film Jennifer Kendall and tour.
Yeah, so he went back to India to film the Kendalls and to talk to the Kendalls, and he talked to Ruth, and he said, I'm thinking of Madhur Jaffrey as a film star. So Ruth said, not Madhur Jaffrey, she's not a film star looking girl. I wasn't buxom, I was thin, I wore glasses, and I wasn't the hourglass figure girl at all. So James said, but she looks very good now. Anyway, he convinced Ruth that I would be fine, but nobody believed it. So they started the filming. I wasn't there at that time in the hill station called Shimla, which is way up in the hills. And I then came, and I had to go up the hill to this place where they were filming, and there were hairpin bends all the way, and I was getting sicker and kept throwing up and kept going up and up and up. And by the time I arrived in Simla, actually we filmed in Kasauli, so it was not all the way up to Simla, but in lower down called Kasauli. And when I arrived there, I was looking pretty awful. And the crew took one look at me and said, she's playing the film star. So it was not auspicious to begin with. But then the first scene we filmed, if you've seen Shakespeare Wala, was the tea party scene where Felicity and I are having tea together. And I just looked at the crew as my cast and act. I didn't know who to act for. I never made a proper picture before. And I thought, well, these are my audience, and I'm going to act for them. And I did, and you should see the film.
And you won an award.
I won an award, yes.
And that was the first award that you won, and this was in Berlin.
First international award that I won at the Berlin Film Festival for acting, yeah.
And you're talking about Saeed. Saeed disappeared, and then you decided you'd look for a toy boy, and you found your more recent husband.
Yeah, maybe.
And the food, everybody kept coming to you sort of saying, suggest a restaurant in New York to go to, and you didn't have a suggestion.
Yeah, so that's how my cookbook came about, which I told you about. But then, after that, I wanted to do another one. I thought, this was fun, I can do another one. And I thought I'd do a vegetarian cookbook. But you see, here was the interesting thing. There was a kind of discrimination amongst the publishers, and all writers were subjected to this, I think, that if you were Asian, you could write about Asia. That's okay. But don't write about Europe. European food. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I've been to Italy 50 times or whatever. And I've been to France, I've been everywhere. And I know the food just as well as anybody else knows the food. And a white writer can go to India once and write an article on Indian food. And I've been to these places so many times and I can't write about that. That's ridiculous. But I wasn't allowed to. Judith Jones, my editor, said, no. You can only write about Asian food. So my first book is vegetarian book is only Asian, or all Asian, I should say, not only Asian, but it's all Asian.
Madhur, one of the first people you went to wanting to write an article about food was the then editor of the New Yorker, who said to you, Indian food? I mean, what is that? There's only French food.
Yes.
And there's nothing
But
beyond
you
that.
said the punchline. Here's the thing.
The question that I wanted to ask you is, what's changed today, Madhur? I mean, you talk about then not really having a suggestion to make about which restaurant that you would recommend for people to go, because Indian restaurants meant a sprinkling of curry powder in some unimaginable liquid. What's changed in New York today?
The Indian scene is great. It is in New York City, at least, it's great. And every day I find new places. Well, first of all, it was this unapologetic foods. You know about them. They have restaurants like not Sema, Sema, etc. And they have a very good group that cook very good Indian food that has even got a Michelin star. So, and their whole attitude is, to hell with everybody. We're going to cook what we like. If you like it, come. If you don't like it, don't. And they charge the earth. But you see, this is the trouble with all restaurants now. There's another restaurant which I've discovered recently, which is very good, called Paisley. And it's downtown on Greenwich Street, I think. But they have to pay for the real estate. You see, they have to pay for the restaurant, the building itself. And they have to charge these obnoxious prices. And if you made it at home, you're not paying for your real estate in that way that they are paying, because they are really being drained of their money by the real estate. So it's very hard for them to charge little. So no main dishes. I mean, there are main dishes at $72. I don't know. I mean, people do it, they pay for it, but who can go easily? So you find your neighborhood little joint, Indian joint, and there are several wonderful Indian joints in Queens, for example. You find your little local joint and you go there and you don't pay that much. But real estate in Manhattan is forbidden.
And is there much more of an appreciation of food, of Indian cuisine, that's not just curry in the way that curry was known?
Absolutely, there is. I mean, even the New York Times is writing about these young, unapologetic foods people and saying how good their food is and how incredibly well they're doing. But it's at a price that I find impossible. I'd rather come and eat in your house, for example.
Madhur, one of the things that the Consul General said in his opening speech is that food really binds people together and is a great democratizer, and you can choose what price point you want to. Again, as the world today is so interconnected through our phones, through the net, etc., do you see much more of a new awareness or an awakening that these foreign things are also pretty much part of the palate of everybody?
Yeah, I find that confusing and hard, because I don't know where it's going to go. Because except if you have a country with a solid tradition of cooking, you can add bits to it, and people have added over the years. We've always added things. I mean, there are ingredients India didn't have that have come from foreign countries. The method, we never had the potato, for example. We never had the tomato.
All the tomato, all the chili.
Yeah, all the chili. But we make use of it and make it Indian. The trouble in America, I think, is that there was no solid base to begin with of American food. There was no long tradition of American food. And they're adding to it in such a hurry. They're adding little bits of Korea, little bits of Thailand, little bits of Japan, Vietnam, Indonesia, India. I mean, they're using the tarka technique, which is fine. I mean, it's a great technique, and other people in Asia, in Europe use it too. The Greeks use something like that, the same similar technique. And in some ways, Spain uses a similar technique when they cook their little eels with the hot chili and oil in it and garlic. It's, it is there in some way. But I find that it's being added to nothing. is being added to a base that hasn't found itself to begin with, and what will it become with all these new things and no solid base? So I'm just wondering, it may turn out wonderfully, but I won't be here 300-400 years later, and that's when we'll know what's happened to American food.
What was really impressive in her book, and she talked about, her mother writing her these cards of, let it cook till it's done. But every recipe that you put out in all your books, you've actually practiced, you've measured, you've written down every aspect of it.
Yeah. The thing is, I started without knowing anything. And I feel that I can write a recipe for people like me, who are starting with nothing. They don't know anything. So my recipes are not 5 lines. People look at it and say, oh my God, can I cook it? It's a page long. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines. It's not like that, because I try to explain how it should look and smell and taste, if you can taste it, at every kind of point. I say, stir the onions until they brown. This takes about 12 minutes. So turn the heat up and then start turning it down slowly, because they'll get browner and browner, and as they turn browner, turn the heat down and keep stirring. It will not happen quickly. So I give these details so people will know how to do it and not get it wrong. And I don't want them to get it wrong. And people also ask me, you don't tell them everything, because then they'll be as good as you. I tell them everything and more, because I want them to be at least as good as me, if not better. I want them to be better than me.
Before I open it up, a very last sort of question. Today, much is about the science of cooking, and whether it's in Spain or France, it's really the new scientific discoveries, the way that you use your utensils, and of course, nitrogen and everything else. Do you see this sort of taking away from the fundamentals of cooking, or do you see this as an inspiration that will go someplace in the future?
I think it's just one aspect of cooking. I think it'll influence some people and make some foods more interesting and delight in a change. But the rest of the world can go on without nitrogen, I think there is a chemical aspect to cooking, and people have written wonderfully about it. And it is there for those who are interested in the sciences. If you want to know why a mayonnaise forms, and if you want to know the details of the hows and the whys, there are scientists who can explain it to you. I have no head for that. So I'm not saying I don't do it because I don't like it or anything. I just don't have the head for it. My head is simpler and plainer, and I go in its direction where it takes me, and it takes me to the side of taste more than the science of it.
Your editor in her foreword writes about how actor, mother, wife, writer, food expert, how do you manage them all together?
I don't manage them. I leave them to manage themselves. I do the best I can in the day I have in my 24 hours. And I just don't, I try and be true to everything that I'm doing. I try and give it the time and the space that it needs. I'm a hard worker. I'm a perfectionist. I want things to be right. And I strive for that. But I can only strive for the things I can do. And there's certain things, anything to do that requires sciences or mathematics or something, I'm a failure, total failure. So I don't even try that.
Far from a failure, and 50th anniversary of the book. Questions from the house. Do we have mics? Are the other mics working, or should I just... Yeah, because all of this is being recorded, I don't know how. If you could also just introduce yourself, your name, so that would help.
My name's Nancy. And I'm wondering, when you went to London, were the Indian spices and things that you would cook with readily available at that point?
Strangely enough, they were. My high school, my drama school was on a street and very near Tottenham Court Road, and very close by was something called the Bombay Emporium. And the Bombay Emporium had practically everything. There were no fresh curry leaves and things like that. I think they came later, but all the spices were there. I could get them easily.
Even before chicken tikka masala became the national dish, India had co-opted the UK. They didn't know about it, but
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jackie. I'm wondering if you've seen this book called The Science, the Lab Science of Food or something like that. It's called. I have a copy of that, and I went through it, and I was like, who is going to do all this work to change? It's like 5 different ways, 25 steps to get a steamed egg or a hard-boiled egg. So what I'm trying to say is I agree with you totally. I don't have the head for that either, the whole science thing. One lab person I refer to if I need that information is McGee.
Of course,
yes.
I adore him.
Yes.
Yes, yes, and I know him very well, and I think he's wonderful. But my head doesn't go in that direction.
No, mine.
I've read his book, but I don't think that way. And more power to him. He's doing a great job. Yeah.
Madhur, over here. Thank you for your time and sharing your journey. I really do appreciate it. I feel like I'm like you, where I have tremendous pride for the cuisine of India. Can you share with me, like, what part of India is your favorite cuisine of the regions?
favorite cuisine.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. It's so hard to give an answer to that, an honest answer, because I've had such good dishes all over India. Wherever I've gone, I found the most amazing food. For example, I was in the south, in what is that area called?
Where, near Madurai or near
No, coast.
Kerala? Kerala?
No, south.
Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Cochin?
No. It's southern Karnataka.
Right.
Mangalore.
Mangalore?
In that region, the Mangalore in that region, and in the countryside, and they eat because it rains 4 months of the year, and they have to survive from what they can find in the forests, and what they can find are mushrooms, and they go from this size, the size of a plate, to very tiny mushrooms, and the size of a plate. They grill it over wood, and then they put crushed green chilies, lemon juice, and salt over it, and have it with their whiskey. But first of all, I'm a whiskey drinker. I love whiskey. And then with it, to have this lovely grilled mushroom, fresh grilled on wood, was absolutely heavenly. But that's particular to that area, to that forest. So you'd find dishes like that all over India as you travel. There's no place that doesn't have something that surprises you, and you say, oh my God, this is the best thing I've ever eaten. You find that everywhere you go.
Her first book, much of the recipes comes from Delhi and around, so the north of India. But it also has a recipe from Bengal. It has inspiration from Kerala and Gujarat, as you
But
said.
my later recipes have all these things. My later books have these mushrooms in them, actually.
Well, I'd like to.
Yes.
I'd like to first of all thank you for such a lovely talk. So straightforward, so open, so real. And the other thing I was curious to know is, which neighborhood did your grandfather have his home in Delhi?
Okay, I'll tell you the story of that. Are you from Delhi?
Yes.
Okay. So, if you go to my grandfather and go a few generations back, the guy who fought for the British, and he was rewarded by the British with lots and lots of land. And the land was the land that was a garden. It was a huge big garden by the river, the Jamuna River. And this whole garden, which was huge, became part of the family land. And all the family, as it has grown, has built on this land. Do you know Kutsiabagh? Do you know the gardens?
So this is north of Delhi, on the Mall Road, on what used to be the Mall Road?
So you come outside Kashmiri Gate,
Okay.
and on the other side is Civil Lines area.
Yes.
Okay, so we are in that area. After Kutsiabagh, it is us. A whole lot of land between the river and Alipur Road. That is all our family.
And the reason I ask about that is because I feel childhood is what brings so much of you as you grow, and what brings you about the different ways of the journey of your life.
Yes.
Yours is obviously very well lived. I'd like to know, what was your most fondest memory as a child growing up where you did, and what is your most favorite food recipe? I know that everybody likes so many different foods, but what's the first thing that strikes you?
Fondest memory and favorite food outside of mushroom.
Well, I would say I don't know if it's the fondest memory, but it is one of the strongest memories, and that is Independence Day. It's not to be forgotten. And I remember being on Kingsway or Rajpath, as it is called now, with, crowds of, all I remember was my father with me, and crowds of people. And then this carriage coming down with Lord Mountbatten and Nehru in white, both looking exceedingly handsome, and coming back, and Mountbatten lowering the flag and Nehru putting up our national flag. And that moment is not to be forgotten.
You also talk about
Favorite food.
You also have this wonderful memory that you shared about just before Gandhi was shot.
Yes.
You'd gone a couple of days before to listen to his prayer meet.
Yeah, that's not the favorite food part though.
Yeah.
So, shall I?
Well, he was Gujarati.
And I love Gujarati food. So, which one shall I tell? I'll
The
tell
food
you
bit.
the favorite food then. I don't know which is my favorite food, but one thing that I will always return to is my basic moong dal. Yeah. Moong dal and rice to me is just and then a little bit of pickle next to it.
That's how most kids grew up.
Yes, and I love that, yes.
Your mother's lime pickle, blackened.
Oh,
over time.
lovely, the lime pickle or mango pickle, something like that, and I'm in heaven.
But with your tadka.
With my tarka, yes.
With what comes first, the chili or the... or
In my family, hing comes
Hing
first.
first.
Yeah. But every family does it different. Okay.
Go ahead.
Hi there, Surisha. Thanks for being here today. Kids are exposed, the generation of kids today are exposed to food from all over the world in a way that, I think, we didn't as adults. How do you think about that as food progresses? What would you like to see happen from that?
I'm just watching my children and grandchildren, how they eat. And I think it has led the freedom to eat anything, any day, has led to such a wide choice and a wide interest. If you're interested in food, in my family, all my children cook and are very good cooks, but my grandchildren are also very good cooks. And they don't limit themselves to anything. They cook Mexican one day and Korean another day. They are free in a way to cook what they like, and they know all these foods. They've been exposed to all of them. So I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful that they do it. And they are marrying or having girlfriends from all different countries. This is also part of the deal. And one of my grandsons has married a Mexican. And another has a Chinese girlfriend. So they do what they want, and it's wonderful. I admire them. I think they are amazing grandkids that I have, and I admire what they're doing and their lives.
Madhur, before closing, to our television audiences watching this, both in America as well as in the UK and Dubai, any last comments?
Don't be afraid to eat what you like, even though people in the papers are telling you not to. Yes, the other day I was speaking in New Marlborough, where we are in Massachusetts, and the first thing the introducing woman said that we have these wonderful food people here, and I'm sure they will, among other things, that people like these from whom we learn not to eat iceberg lettuce. So I immediately stood up on my hind legs and said, first I will answer that. I love iceberg lettuce. I come from a country with only soft lettuce. And when I first came to iceberg lettuce, I was coming on the Queen Mary from England to America, and suddenly on the boat, on the Queen Mary, they served iceberg lettuce, and I said, what is this? This is crunch heaven. Absolutely delicious, because I've grown up with every soft lettuce in the world, wonderful lettuces, but not crunchy. So I fell in love with it. So eat what you want. Don't let people tell you anything.
So don't be afraid, ladies and gentlemen, 50th anniversary, celebrating Nigerians, Madhur Jaffrey.